The Browns' Week 3 matchup against the Washington football team is going to be a test for both sides. This Browns offensive line that's ranked highly in this Washington defensive line that is ranked among the best in the NFL. So what team should come out of this matchup with the advantage? What team should win this Sunday? Well, let's talk about it. Real quick before I talk about this matchup, if you're new here and like what I do on this channel, please make sure you hit that subscribe button and ding that notification bell so you can be notified when I upload. The NFL season is in full swing right now, and if you want some of the best coverage on the Browns and the NFL, then please make sure you're subscribed here and notified so you don't miss a single thing. So I'm going to try a different format for this week's breakdown, and what I'm going to do is split this up into different matchups. The Browns offense versus the Washington defense, and the Washington offense versus the Browns defense. And we're going to start with the Browns offensive matchup. For the Browns offense, this is going to be a relatively simple game plan when it comes to the ideology of it, but when it comes to execution, that's going to be a lot more difficult. And what I mean by that is that the main bullet point this week for the Cleveland Browns when it comes to trying to beat Washington offensively is block this Washington pass rush. But that is something that is much easier said than done. Chase Young, Ryan Kerrigan, Montez Sweat have all combined for 5.5 sacks in 2 games. Those are just the edge rushers for this Washington defense, and they might not even be the most dangerous part of this pass rush. The interior linemen, Matt Ioannidis, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen have all been having good seasons, all been grading out well in both pass and run situations, all have been having solid years. You add that on top of Jonathan Bostic, who has 2 sacks, 4 pressures on only 12 snaps as a pass rusher, and you see a defense that can get a lot of pressure, and the most impressive thing is they do it without blitzing a lot. And that is why I say, when Washington can get pressure and get home with their front 4, they are absolutely a top 10 defense. They rank in the top 10 in sacks with 11, interceptions with 3, but there's a huge asterisk on that I'm going to talk about later. They rank number 6 with pressures with 24, number 7 in scoring percentage with 33.3%, number 8 in the NFL in turnover percentage, 14.8%, and number 10 in the NFL pressure per drop back percentage, which is 25.8. These numbers are extremely impressive, especially when you consider they only have blitzed 24 times. So a lot of this production, a lot of this damage that you're seeing is just with the front 4. Football Outsiders per DVOA has this unit ranked number 7 overall. They also have them ranked as the number 1 pass defense in the NFL and the 21st ranked run defense in the NFL. Pro Football Focus has Washington ranked as the number 1 defense in the NFL through 2 weeks, the number 5 pass rush, and the number 11 run defense with a number 4 ranking in coverage defense. And the reason I wanted to include such a diverse array of rankings and metrics when talking about this Washington defense is because I think since it's Washington, a lot of people assume that it's either bad competition they face and that they're not really that good. But that is not the case. This is a top 10 defense. Because if the Browns come into this game and they can't block this front 4 plus Jonathan Bostic every once in a while, they might as well be playing the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Washington, in those situations, has actually been better than Pittsburgh in 2020. So if they can get pressure with their front 4, that's not going to be good for Cleveland by any means. And that is Washington's main play at trying to beat the Browns this week, is if they can create a ton of pressure with that front 4. And again, it's not against terrible competition, not great competition that they put these numbers up, but the 15th ranked pass blocking offensive line in Philadelphia and the number 5 ranked pass blocking offensive line per DVOA in Pro Football Focus has these 2 defenses ranked 13 and 20th respectively. So yeah, the offensive lines have not been nearly as good as the Cleveland Browns offensive line projects to be this week, but also it's not like they've done this to bottom level offensive lines and are really only benefiting from that. These are 2 good offensive lines. So this is going to be a massive test for both the Browns offensive line and Washington's defensive line, as this will be the best competition both units who rank at the top of the league will have faced. The Browns' offensive line through 2 weeks has been a consensus top 5 unit in both pass and run block situations. Pro Football Focus DVOA, they rank in the top 10 at the very least and usually in the top 5. The Browns' offensive line is number 1 in pocket time, 2.8 seconds they average. That's up from last year's, which was a league worst 2.3 seconds. This Browns offensive line is the 4th most blitzed offensive line in football, but they are tied for the 2nd lowest pressures allowed and have the 3rd lowest pressure per dropback percentage in the entire NFL. That is insanely impressive. But to be fair, the Browns haven't done this to any pass rushes that advanced metrics find particularly special. Baltimore's pass rush in DVOA is number 12, but PFF it's 21. Cincinnati's pass rush in DVOA is 18. In PFF, it's 31. This is going to be a matchup between two teams that have top 5 ranked units on both sides of the line, so it's going to be interesting to see who comes out on top. But in my opinion, I also think Washington's defense may have a few critical flaws that the Browns can exploit if they can contain this front 4 plus the occasional Bostic pass rush. Deron Payne and Matt Ioannidis, who see a lot of run defense snaps, are not necessarily great run defenders. They're good in that area, but they're not great. The Browns last week used a lot of inside zone and executed really well. Also, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt were specifically really good on inside zone. The Washington defense also ranks in the top 10 in the NFL on missed tackles with 17, 2 more than Cincinnati did, and we know how they fared in the 4th quarter. They also give up the most yards after the catch with Jarvis and Odell. That's always something that opposing defenses should be concerned about because those are 2 guys who can kill you with yak. And for the Browns offense in total, what I would suggest is that they try to grind them out early with a ton of rushing attempts. Washington's defense also ranks in the top 10 in penalties accepted. So I think if you tire them out, you may be able to frustrate them and draw penalties. And again, if you can contain this front 4, I think you can attack downfield with play action and be very successful. I think it's highly likely that Washington's secondary, as far as coverage goes, only grades out well because his defensive line doesn't have to blitz to get pressure. Another reason I think this team grades out well that might be a little bit of a red herring is that they have those 3 interceptions, which definitely helps them in advanced metrics. But if you dig deeper, you'll see that while they have that high number of interceptions, they also have the lowest number of passes defended in the NFL with 4. 3 interceptions, 4 passes defended. That number suggests to me that those 3 interceptions are more by coincidence and luck than by good play by the secondary. If you look at the proven and the very good secondaries like Pittsburgh's and Baltimore's, those teams have 11 and 10 passes defended respectively. So I would very much like to see, if I'm the Cleveland Browns, what this Washington secondary can do if that front 4 for Washington cannot generate a ton of pressure on its own. I really would like to see how that secondary will hold up. Now for this Browns defense and its matchup against the Washington offense, we have to start with the offensive line for the Washington football team. This offensive line has given up the 2nd most sacks allowed in the NFL with 7. They also have the 2nd lowest pocket time with 2.2 seconds in the NFL. They've been blitzed the 6th least time in the NFL with only 19 blitzes, but also have allowed the 7th most pressures with 19. And while this is not a 1-to-1 stat, the 19 pressures on 19 blitzes, not necessarily the greatest thing in the world. When it comes to advanced metrics, this offensive line is the 28th ranked pass blocking offensive line on PFF, the 30th per DVOA. Pro Football Focus also has them ranked as the 21st run blocking offensive line. DVOA has them lower at 29. If you look at the unit they'll be playing, the Browns defensive line, the Browns match up quite well in this area. The Browns are tied for 5th most sacks in the NFL as a unit with 5, the 3rd most pressures in the NFL with 26. They blitz the 7th most times in the NFL with 26. And again, it's not 1-to-1, but 26 pressures, 27 blitzes. pretty good. And Pro Football Focus has this pass rush ranked as the 7th, while DVOA has them ranked as 17th. The run defense is ranked as the number 2 per Pro Football Focus, and DVOA has this run defense ranked at number 4. Again, the Browns defensive line matches up very well with Washington, but as we all know, the Browns defense has a massive, massive leak in the secondary. It's where both Cincinnati and Baltimore were able to successfully attack and put up a combined 4th-ranked 68 points against this defense. So how does Washington match up in that area, and can they, like Cincy and Baltimore, successfully attack that weakness? Well, let's look at the Washington passing attack, and it comes down to 2 people, and the first is Dwayne Haskins. Through 2 games, Dwayne Haskins has had 401 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, which seem pretty fine on the surface, but averages and advanced statistics absolutely hate Dwayne Haskins, and that's no exaggeration. For starters, he has a 56% completion rate, which is not great considering that he averages 6.4 yards per attempt, which is 30th out of 34 quarterbacks. Pro Football Focus has him ranked as the 32nd out of 34 quarterbacks in the NFL. His QBR, a stat that has accurately predicted the last 2 league MVPs, has him ranked dead last in the NFL at 33. There is a backup in the NFL that currently has a higher QBR than Dwayne Haskins. It's not great. In the Browns defense, while they have been a pretty terrible coverage defense, they also have had to do that against Lamar Jackson, who is the reigning MVP in Pro Football Focus, currently ranks as the number 8 quarterback with a QBR that's the 10th best in the NFL, and Joe Burrow, who Pro Football Focus ranks at 21, who has the 25th worst QBR in the NFL. Joe Burrow, not necessarily a world beater at this point in his career, but Lamar Jackson most certainly is a top 10 quarterback, the reigning MVP. Obviously, he's very good, and those 2 quarterbacks right now, from an advanced metric standpoint, are in a completely different world than Dwayne Haskins is right now. And the most frightening part about Dwayne Haskins and how bad he ranks is that the defenses he's played against haven't necessarily been the strongest units in the NFL. Philadelphia, Pro Football Focus has ranked as the 26th best coverage defense. DVOA says 27th best pass defense. Arizona, per PFF, the 14th ranked coverage. DVOA says the 7th best pass defense. So it goes up there for Arizona. Nonetheless, it's not necessarily the greatest competition in the world, and it is hugely concerning that he has had struggles to this level against competition that shouldn't necessarily force him to be that bad. Now, the other guy that's going to be important to the Washington passing attack, and he pretty much is the Washington passing attack, it's Terry McLaurin. Ohio State fans are very familiar with him. Through 2 games, he's had 12 receptions, 186 yards, and a touchdown. Per Pro Football Focus, he's the 18th ranked wide receiver. He has received 26% of Haskins' targets, 33% of Haskins' completions. He makes up for 46% of Haskins' production and 50% of Haskins' touchdowns. Quite literally, Haskins owes a lot to Terry McLaurin, quite frankly. Also, a number that bodes well for McLaurin, but not necessarily Haskins, is that 61% of McLaurin's yards, which, again, let's remember, make up almost 50% of Haskins' entire production this season, 61% of those yards were after the catch. In my opinion, Terry McLaurin should never see a snap that doesn't have Denzel Ward in front of him. So how does Denzel Ward match up? Denzel, per Pro Football Focus, is the 15th ranked defensive back. He also is a highly graded tackler and has the speed to keep up with McLaurin. So he matches up as well as anybody can against him. And if Denzel can neutralize McLaurin, then that will take away a significant portion of Washington's passing attack, because McLaurin is almost all of it. And if that's the case, then it's very likely that the Browns' defensive line will be able to pressure and hopefully sack Haskins a healthy amount. Washington also does not have the variety of threats through the air that Baltimore and Cincinnati had offensively to minimize the effect of both the Browns' defensive line and the amount of pressures they were able to get, and Denzel Ward's coverage ability. Baltimore and Cincinnati can both afford to go away from their number 1 guy to get production, not necessarily the case with Washington. The Browns' run defense has surprisingly been one of the better units in the NFL so far through 2 weeks, and Washington's run offense isn't anything necessarily special. The fact of the matter is that Washington does not match up well with Cleveland, no matter how you shape it, try to flip it and turn it. They don't match up well with what this Browns offense and defense has proven that they can be good at through 2 weeks. Where they are strong, Cleveland is also strong, if not stronger. And where Cleveland has major weaknesses, Washington doesn't necessarily have the firepower on paper to exploit it. Offensively, if the Cleveland Browns offensive line holds up against this Washington front, then things should be open through the air. The Browns should be able to move the ball on the ground, which also is going to open up another world of issues for Washington. Defensively, in my opinion, if the Browns allow Denzel Ward to follow Terry McLaurin for the bulk of the game, they should be fine. But to be honest here, that's somewhat of a big if. Terry can move around a lot and potentially line up in the slot. If that happens and Denzel Ward is not there to follow him, but Tavare Thomas is, then that's going to be a terrible matchup and Terry McLaurin's going to have another great day. But if Ward follows him, which means that Greedy has to be healthy or Kevin Johnson is A, healthy, and B, in condition to take a starter amount of snaps in the slot position after lacerating his liver during camp. If one of those two things happens and Ward's allowed to follow McLaurin no matter where he lines up, then I think the Browns have a very good chance in slowing down McLaurin, which should lead to more sacks, pressures, and hopefully force Haskins into more interceptions or incompletions. With that being said, and with everything I've laid out, the Browns should win this game at home by multiple scores. Because if this team shows up to play at home against this team that they match up very well with, all indications are that they should win and win relatively easy. For the Browns to lose this week, they would not only have to beat themselves and play sloppy, they would have to be bad in specific areas that they have excelled in so far in 2020. And that means play worse than they did against Baltimore. Quite frankly, a loss here at home would make me question the locker room culture and the entire coaching staff. Because from a football standpoint, the Browns have a pretty big advantage here and they should succeed. But if the Browns don't come out prepared and beat themselves either as bad or worse than they did in week 1 and quite frankly countless other times under Freddie Kitchens last year, then that would beg me to ask this question that I don't want to. Was it just Freddie Kitchens last year why this team was a mess, or does it have more to do with the locker room leadership? Hopefully that's a question the Browns don't have to ask themselves because they will come out, play well, and beat a Washington team that they really should beat. But if they don't, expect those questions to be asked because that would be unacceptable for a team that hopes to make the playoffs this year. But that's my thoughts on this week 2 matchup. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Do you think the Browns are going to win, or do you think Washington's going to pull off a little bit of an upset here? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day and have a good night.